Most men are waiting. Not consciously, not deliberately, but deeply, quietly. They are sitting in the dark, like children in the collapsed building, hoping someone will come pull back the rubble and say, "I found you. You're safe now." They say they're building. They say they're busy, but they're not moving toward the fire. They're orbiting it, warming their hands, avoiding the burn. And in that orbit is a secret they'll never name, that they're waiting for a power greater than themselves to start their story. A mentor, a woman, a chance, a sign, a voice from the heavens, something, anything that will whisper, "Now you may begin," but no one is coming. Joseph Campbell called it the call to adventure, and nearly every man ignores it the first time he hears it. Because it doesn't sound like glory. It doesn't sound like this destiny. It sounds like discomfort, like loss, like death. The call rarely comes with applause. It comes with silence. A moment of despair so total you think the story has ended, when really, that's the beginning. But most men miss it, because they've been trained to expect something more cinematic. They want the quest without the collapse. They want the sword without the exile. But no man begins his real life until the life he clung to falls apart. There is something in the masculine psyche so conditioned by waiting for permission that even when a door opens, we ask, "Can I?" instead of walking through it. You can hear it in the way we talk about time. "I'm not ready. Maybe next year, once I get things figured out." As if readiness is something that ever arrives. As if life waits politely for your comfort. It doesn't. The hero's path is not a sidewalk. It's a storm, and the longer you stand still, the more the wind rots your resolve. You think you're being wise. You think you are preparing. But most of what you call planning is just elegant procrastination. A more socially acceptable way to delay your own becoming. Because deep down you know the truth, that the moment you answer the call, something in you must die, and that terrifies you more than failure. The man you are now cannot survive the journey you were born for. He has to be buried on the side of the road so something truer can rise. But that death doesn't come with music. It comes with boredom, loneliness, the ache of watching other men pretend they're fulfilled while your own life feels like a paused game. And in that ache, there's a chance, a tiny tear in the veil. Most ignore it. They binge, they scroll, they run toward noise. But a very few, pause. They stare into the ache instead of away from it. And in that moment, if they're quiet enough, they might hear something old. Not a voice from above, but a gravitational nudge from something buried beneath all their roles and wounds and pride. That's the real call. Not a thunderclap, not a burning bush, but a whisper you've spent your whole life trying not to hear. You'll rationalize against it. You'll say, "It's not the right time," or "I don't have enough money," or "Once I fix my relationship, my health, my job." As if truth is not readiness or enough. As if life waits politely for your comfort. It doesn't. The hero's path is not a sidewalk, it's a storm, and the longer you stand still, the more the wind rots your resolve. You think you're being wise, you think you're preparing, but most of what you call planning is just elegant procrastination, a more socially acceptable way to delay your own becoming. Because deep down you know the truth, that the moment you answer the call, something in you must die, and that terrifies you more than failure. The man you are now cannot survive the journey you were born for. He has to be buried on the side of the road so something truer can rise. But that death doesn't come with music. It comes with boredom, loneliness, the ache of watching other men pretend they're fulfilled while your own life feels like a paused game. And in that ache, there's a chance, a tiny tear in the veil. Most ignore it. They binge, they scroll, they run toward noise. But a very few, pause. They stare into the ache instead of away from it. And in that moment, if they're quiet enough, they might hear something old. Not a voice from above, but a pull from within. Not a scream, not a sermon, just a gravitational nudge from something buried beneath all their roles and wounds and pride. That's the real call. Not a thunderclap, not a burning bush, but a whisper you've spent your whole life
trying not to hear. You'll rationalize against it. You'll say, it's not the right time, or I don't have enough money, or once I fix my relationship, my health, my job. But the truth is, you don't need more of anything. You need less. Less safety, less certainty, less approval. You're not under-equipped, you're over-attached. And that attachment is killing you slowly. Campbell knew this. That's why every myth begins the same way, with the ordinary world cracking. Something is off, something is wrong, the village isn't enough anymore. But it takes pain to notice, because men are brilliant at convincing themselves they're content, especially when they're terrified of what might happen if they're not. So the call becomes a nuisance, a faint discomfort they medicate instead of investigate, a background hum they mute with distraction. But it keeps returning, louder, sharper, until eventually life stops asking, it starts taking. The job ends, the relationship fractures, the identity fails, and now the man is stripped, naked before the fire he spent his whole life avoiding. And that's when the real story begins. Not when he chooses, but when he's forced. When all the external scaffolding collapses and he realizes there is no rescue, no mother, no lover, no mentor, no savior, no map. Just him, just breath, just the unlit path. And it is in that moment, not of triumph, but of total disorientation, that the first step can be taken. Not toward certainty, but toward necessity. You don't go because you know, you go because you can't stay. That's where the real men are made. Not at the finish line, but at the cliff's edge.
The hardest thing a man will ever do is walk forward when nothing guarantees he'll survive it. Because everything in him has been trained to calculate, to weigh the risks, to ask, what if it doesn't work? But that question is poison. That question is this siren that drags him back into the cave of hesitation. He forgets. Every myth, every story that ever lit the soul of a man began not with certainty, but with surrender. Surrender to the unknown. Surrender to the wilderness. Surrender to the truth that safety is not the highest virtue. That the soul doesn't care if you're comfortable. It only wants you awake. The men who truly become something in this world, who come back changed, crowned, alive, they are not the ones who waited until they were fearless. They are the ones who moved while afraid, who stepped forward even as their knees trembled and their voices cracked, because somewhere along the line, they realized something terrifying and liberating, that the thing they were most afraid to lose wasn't worth keeping. It's not that they didn't love what they had. It's that they finally saw it for what it was, a cocoon, necessary for a time, but deadly if clung to forever. Campbell called it the threshold, that invisible line between the known world and the unknown, between the false self and the real one. Every man must cross it, not once, not gloriously, but again and again each time life demands more of him. And it never looks like you think. It doesn't come with applause or clear instructions. Often it comes disguised as a breakdown, a betrayal, a moment so hollow you feel like a ghost walking through your own skin. And yet, there's something holy about that hollow, because now, finally, you have nothing to protect. And when there's nothing left to protect, there's nothing left to fake. This is when the journey actually begins. Not with the map, but with abandonment. The way a soldier leaves behind the weight of his old life, or a monk shaves his head in a symbolic death of ego. The hero begins when the man says, I am no longer willing to live this half-life. Not just I want more, but I refuse to keep lying to myself. I refuse to keep showing up in rooms where I shrink. I refuse to keep loving people who don't see me. I refuse to keep betraying my soul for the comfort of predictability.
I'm done waiting. And that, strangely enough, is when the real help arrives. Not before. Not when you're asking politely, not when you're trying to earn it through virtue or discipline. No, the real help comes when you finally step into the storm naked. No backup plan, no exit strategy, just you and the raw, primal ache to become. That's when the allies show up. The mentors, the signs, the sacred accidents. Not because the universe was testing you, but because you had to change your state before you could see what was already there. You had to walk into the fire before the flame revealed its wisdom. But most men will never know this, not because they're not strong enough, but because they think strength means not needing help. They think manhood is isolation, that if they struggle, something is wrong with them, that they should be able to figure it all out alone. That lie is killing them. Joseph Campbell knew that the hero never travels alone. He is always joined by strange guides, by unexpected friends, by forces he could never predict. But those only emerge after he moves, not before. That's the curse of the masculine delay. It's not that you're incapable. It's that you're waiting for the fear to vanish before you begin. But it never will. It doesn't need to. Because the fear isn't the enemy. The waiting is. The waiting turns the soul brittle. It hollows out the spine. It teaches you to narrate your life instead of live it. You become a man who talks about what he could do, what he might become. And soon, even you start to believe the myth of your own almost. You were not born to be almost. There is a fire beneath your ribs that was never meant to be managed. It was meant to consume. But only if you stop pretending your life is a rehearsal. Only if you stop treating yourself like a project and start treating yourself like a warrior with one shot at something real. And yes, it will cost you. You will lose things. Comfort, control, maybe even people. But what you gain is something no man can gift you. A kind of soul-deep legitimacy that only emerges after you say yes to the part of you you spent years avoiding. The part that knows this job is too small for you, knows this relationship is shrinking you, knows that this routine, this numb, this not-so-bad existence is not it. But that part of you won't shout. It will wait and wait until you stop waiting for someone else to anoint you and realize you've been chosen the whole time. The only thing left is to choose yourself.
But choosing yourself doesn't look like the movies. There's no dramatic music, no slow-motion montage of victories. Most of the time, it looks like loss. Like pulling away from everything that once told you who you were. Like disappointing people who only ever loved the mask. Because that's the part no one tells you about awakening. You will break hearts, mostly your own. You will feel the echo of all the lives you might have lived if you just stayed asleep. If you'd stayed the good son, the reliable partner, the predictable friend. But you didn't, and now there's no going back. This is the ordeal Campbell wrote of. The central crucible of the journey, the cave you fear to enter, which holds the treasure you seek. But the treasure is not gold, it's not fame, it's not even happiness, it's truth. And truth, for most men, is the last thing they think they need. Because truth demands something sacred, your illusions. You cannot keep your coping mechanisms and become whole. You cannot stay addicted to validation and discover your voice. You cannot cling to the system that keeps you small and also claim to be free. Something must die. And if you're honest, you already know what it is. Maybe it's the fake ambition, the empire you built not out of joy but out of fear of being seen as nothing. Maybe it's the approval addiction, that reflex to contort your soul just to keep the peace. Maybe it's the way you play it humble when you're really afraid of being powerful. Either way, there's no resurrection without crucifixion. You don't get to bypass that. You don't get to skip the wilderness and still wear the crown. Even Christ had to descend before he rose. Every real man does. That's why your pain isn't punishment, it's passage. It's the passage through the death of the false self. But here's the paradox. As the old you dies, something deeper begins to stir, something quieter but unshakable. A self not born of programming but of presence, not made from memory but from myth, your myth, not the one you were handed but the one you claim. This is where the return begins. Not the return to who you were, but the return to the world as who you now are. Changed, marked, not louder, not more confident necessarily, but deeper, more anchored, like a tree that grew its roots in fire and now no longer fears the storm. And yet, this return is not just for you, because the final twist in Campbell's monomyth, the part most men miss, is that the hero must bring back the boon. He must give the gift. He must take everything he suffered and author it, not to be celebrated, not to be admired, but because that's the only way it becomes real. You don't keep what you don't share. The man who went into the wilderness to find himself is not the man who comes out. He doesn't need applause. He doesn't need to be understood. What he has now is more sacred than approval. He has clarity, purpose, alignment, and a deep knowing that his life is no longer for sale. That's the real rescue. Not that someone swoops in to save him, but that he stops waiting for that to happen. That he realizes no woman, no father figure, no career, no spiritual guru is coming to lift him out of his own apathy. That it was always on him. And that, far from being a burden, is the gift. Because if no one's coming to save you, then nothing is stopping you. You're free to fail, to create, to rise, to shatter, to become. You no longer need a perfect plan. You no longer need permission. You only need a willingness to meet life not as a theory, but as an act of war. And that war is not against the world. It's not against women. It's not against culture or society. It's against your own cowardice, your own forgetfulness, your own refusal to live in the fire you were born to carry. You are the hero you've been waiting for. So stop waiting. Get up. Begin.